Government says it will continue to borrow around 553 billion rand per annum. And this is due to the underperformance in revenue collection and increased spending pressures. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says that the budget deficit is projected to reach 4.9% in 2023-2024. The minister further announced that the Social Relief of Distress grant will be extended for another year. Minister Godongwana was delivering the medium-term budget policy statement in Parliament yesterday. He also joins us now virtually to further unpack the medium-term budget policy statement. Minister, good morning and thanks for speaking to us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
Minister, you emphasized the need to stabilize public finances and to contain the widening deficit. So to that end, what kind of remedial steps needs to be taken to avoid a fiscal disaster?
Let me just say, why is this necessary? Two things. If at the rate at which the cost of borrowing and the debt service cost are rising and the economy is not growing, that gap is widening between the economic growth and the growth of the debt service cost. Eventually, if we don't do anything, we are not going to be able to pay that debt. Now, let me just qualify this. I'm saying this because the debt on its own is not a major problem. It's not the size of the debt that matters. What matters is the capacity of the economy to service that debt. We're saying at the rate at which the economy at the moment is growing, its capacity to service any growing debt is becoming more and more constrained. And therefore, that needs to be contained. There are a number of things, the ways in which you can do that. The first one is to manage your on the expenditure side and reprioritize your budget, reorganize some of the spending programs you think that they may not be as useful as they used to be in the past. Secondly, is to jack up on the revenue side.
So if we just break that down further, Minister, you announced that government will be borrowing an average of 553 billion rand per year over the medium term. And as a result of that, gross debt will then rise to 4.8 trillion in 2023-24 to 5.2 trillion in the next financial year. And by 2025-2026, it will exceed the 6 trillion rand mark. Now, the question then is, Minister, is borrowing to plug the budget funding shortfall sustainable in the long run?
Let's draw a distinction between two things. Borrowing is what each and every government does. When I tabled the budget in February, I said our expenditure is going to be over 2 trillion, but our revenue is going to be about 1.7 trillion. So there's already a gap of 300 billion rand in that sense, what we call the fiscal deficit. So what that means is that we will have to go and borrow that amount. In addition to that gap, we'll have to borrow to service the existing debt. That's normal and traditional in any government environment. No government does not do that. The only difference is that if the economy of that country is not growing sufficiently enough to be able to service that debt, that becomes a problem. So there's nothing untoward.
To that point, Minister, our economy certainly is not doing enough. So what needs to be done to ensure that the economy actually grows at a rate that would be satisfactory?
First and foremost, we've outlined a couple of key interventions that are necessary. Electricity has been a major constraint in this economy. If you look at the performance of this economy since the global financial crisis in 2008, That coincided with the outages in March 2008. So it's clear that since 2008, this economy has not, there are other factors, has not been performing very well. And I would argue is that electricity has been a major constraint. Added to that is a new dimension in the form of logistics, particularly as it affects a critical sector in our economy, the mining sector. Thirdly, crime is a major issue which needs to be attended to. So a couple of those issues, in my view, are quite critical.
And just speaking to those that you mentioned, Minister, for example, you look at the infrastructure at our logistics entities, and those seemingly have been left to deteriorate to a point where they now need to be recapitalized almost. Surely that's not a good way to go. So in terms of just, being sure to make sure that you actually are tough on the entities, on the portfolios who manage the budgets for those, what are you going to do differently?
Look, let me just take as a template ESCOM and SAA. We poured a lot of money into ESCOM. ESCOM to date, we spent 283 billion rand on ESCOM. Over the next 3 years, we're going to spend another 254 billion rand. Put together, it's almost R500 billion that we've been putting into ESCOM. The question, are we getting the efficiency gains we require? Thirdly, in economics, we've got what you call opportunity cost. If that R500 billion was used elsewhere, for instance, in building roads and so on and so on. So there's always an opportunity cost. If we're spending more money in bailing out this institution, we're also, by implication, depriving people of other services because we're putting money into these institutions. So that issue needs to be further debated properly. So sitting where I sit in finances, I've got to make these policy choices on a day-to-day basis and say, should I put more money on ESCOM, Transnet, DANEL, or should I put more money on roads? Those are the choices that we've got to make.
And tough choices on the one hand, but, as the lay public looking on, you look at some of these state-owned entities and the sort of drain that they are on the fiscus, and you look at some of the decisions that are being made in these state-owned entities that do raise a lot of questions, Minister. We have the unbundling process at ESCOM, and now ESCOM putting out, for example, a tender for 100 million rand for the rebranding of these new entities. And while one might say, okay, it needs to happen, does it have to cost 100 million rand, for example? Because people start companies every day. They design logos every day. They brand their companies every day. So why does it have to cost that much at an entity that is already such a huge drain on the fiscus? These are some of the things that people look at. You take the SAA example, Minister. Again, a private equity partner was brought on board. But where is that process? How is this actually assisting the fiscus? Because it seems as though the status quo remained from before that entity was placed under business rescue.
The unfortunate thing, you're asking the wrong person, because the person you're asking is also asking the same questions. These
are the frustrations.
As a Minister of Finance, I'm asking people those difficult questions. Let me just say, first and foremost, the unbundling of ESCOM is necessary. Let me tell you why. First and foremost, once you introduce independent power producers, then it means independent power producers as generators must have equal access to the transmission grid, same as Transnet, as ESCOM generation. What that means is that the transmission company must not be in the same stable with the generation company of ESCOM, so that it treats all generation companies on an equal footing. That is a necessary step, and we agree with that. Whether they should brand themselves about 100 million that I'm hearing for the first time, I would ask a similar question as you. Is it value for money in such an exercise?
And, you know, Minister, you look at these sort of things. The SAA deal, for example, where does that stand? When is the private equity partner going to relieve some of the financial burden in that instance?
There's a department which has got operational responsibility.
What did they tell you, Minister? What is that department telling you in that regard?
The last time I checked, they were amending the SAA Act because the SAA Act as it stands does not allow for any private equity in SAA. So, private partners. So, the last time I interacted with the process, when they were submitting to Parliament an amendment to the SAA Act. So, yes, there's that process, but for the operational aspect of that business, the Department of Public Enterprises is responsible for that.
And then just going back to Eskom and, you know, the debt relief that was going to be granted to Eskom, you seem to now have somewhat altered, you know, the terms and conditions to that, Minister. Why was that? Why was it necessary? And was it because of the likes of Transnet now coming to ask government to take over some of its debt because you did that for Eskom?
There is indeed a possibility of people thinking that what we did to Eskom provide a template for everybody else. But the changes that are being made in the debt relief, Eskom debt relief bill, are changes which are intended to, which are an outcome of the experiences we've had in the interaction both of us with Eskom, which we think are necessary moving forward.
Minister, so many things that I want to touch on, and of course we don't have that much time, but going to the municipalities and the writing off of debt there. So as of October, 67 municipalities have already submitted their applications for that debt relief program, and only 28 of those applications have been approved. Let's talk about the rationale behind that. And also, again, in a country where some of these entities, these state-owned entities, will complain that they can't do what they're supposed to do, fulfill their mandates, in other words, because they are simply not being paid. Is this the right example that is being set by actually giving this sort of relief to municipalities?
Let me say to you, some of these municipalities owe Eskom huge amounts. If you look at their financial position, there's not even a chance on earth that they'll ever pay Eskom. So that's the first point. So how do we mitigate that risk moving forward? What we're trying to do is to say, moving forward, we need to mitigate that risk. How? By introducing a culture of payment. First, the municipality must undertake to pay Eskom moving forward. And they must demonstrate that over a longer period of over a year. In other words, we're not going to say, oh, you're paying this month, we're taking the debt. You must demonstrate that you're going to pay. The second element of that is that the municipality must go to the residents of that municipality that owe the municipality and say, okay, you yourself were extending a debt relief, but for you to get a debt relief, we will wipe out what you owe the municipality in Eskom, but in return, you must do a prepaid meter. Well, that means both the municipality and the residents moving forward will be able to pay Eskom. In other words, we're mitigating the risk moving forward so that Eskom can be able to generate revenue and municipalities pay. So it's a kind of carrot on the stick. We are incentivizing them to move and pay Eskom moving forward.
Minister, with regard to revenue collection, the collection is expected to be almost 57 billion rand lower than was forecast in the main budget in February. What are your concerns around that?
The component of that which we think is an in-year specific, which may not necessarily be the case moving forward. And that is, the first one is the increase in VAT refunds, which has had undermined the VAT collections in terms of providing revenue for us. That's one component. The second component has been the performance of the mining industry, largely because of the logistic aspect, which, let me just give you an example, which I got from the Mineral Council. A train carries about 8,200 tons to Richards Bay. A truck carries 30,000 tons. So in essence, you need about 276 trucks to load the same amount of a train. And that is not efficient for the industry, and therefore has substantially reduced, for instance, in the coal sector, the amount of coal that goes through Richards Bay by almost 20 million tons. So in that sense, it is going to knock-on effect on the performance of the sector and also on their profitability, and therefore reducing what's available to the fiscus.
Well, Minister, we are out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. But thanks so much for engaging us this morning. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana speaking to us about the midterm budget policy statement that he, of course, delivered yesterday.